If you are here, you wish to know. Welcome to What's New This Week, a weekly series where I speak about different releases that I found interesting so I could keep up on you also. Don't miss out on new video game releases and stuff to watch. And the first thing we're gonna talk about today is Magical Inn, which is, as it implies from the name, you are wizard or witch and you have your own inn and you're a proprietor of your inn, and it's more why you should need to make sure that people will be happy visiting your inn, and you will use some kind of magic. Also customization, of course you will be deciding how to put furniture in a room. You'll have to also negotiate with deck actions in order to make sure the deal would be better for you. And of course collect wood and stone in order to get the right materials for crafting. That's a magical inn of your own. Oscuro's Blossom Glow. So it seems like a Metroidvania with a bunch of bugs. And a young girl in a poncho travels this dungeon full of life, meeting all kinds of different creatures. It's adventure with consequences of your choices. So I wonder how it's gonna be. It seems nice, art style looks cute, so I suppose it's maybe something interesting. Tiny Bookshop. A game when you are owner of a little bookshop, a little cart full of books, and you will be selling them in a little town and speak with people and like finding new friendships, so you can customize your own little cart full of books and recommend people all kinds of different books that they want. And that's pretty much it. A fun little game about book selling. Ritual of the Raven looks like another farming simulator, also magic based, and you will be creating pot plant creatures and choose a pattern for them, so they would do gardening instead of you. That's kinda new to the genre, so I suppose that's what makes it different from anything else. Of course you also do your own foraging for materials to do rituals, magical rituals and stuff. Chaindehu's Ashes of Elrant. So if you did not play the whole game, before the final battle you'll be able to see new content from the DLC that they released for Chaindehus, and there's a new companion to your party, there's a new minigames, there's a fishing minigame, because fishing minigame is a must, and you'll get new content, unlike me. King's Blade. So that's a beat-em-up slasher in a like Conan Warrior setting like, where a bunch of adventurers will be traveling around from left and right and beat up all the enemies on the way. There's Conan, barbarian looking guy, there's Amazon, there's a giant bug, and the wizard. So at least 4 characters, 4-player co-op I suppose. Okay. Mafia, the old country, when they decided to go back in time and choose Sicilia as a main setting for Mafia, showing you how, not how it all started, but how it was in the starting points when the Mafia appeared as we know it. So that would be interesting to look at. Breakouts 3! All Gundam fans rejoice, because we can play a game with customizable mechas with full speed octane action. And it seems incredibly fast, and definitely gonna be fun making your own mecha, customize it, and beat up all the enemies however you want it. A samurai in time. So the premise of the movie is there was a samurai in the Tokugawa era, and he got transported into the future to a samurai movie set. And when he figured out that he's in the future, what he decided to do, to be a background character that's constantly dying on a movie set. So that's a hilarious premise, definitely will be fun. Of course he can turn back in time, because he doesn't know how he appeared in the future in the first place, and the premise is so fun that it's definitely gonna be a fun movie. And unfortunately that's all I found interesting this week. So, if you want this channel to live and grow, please support me here on all social media, share my videos when anything for sharing, do jump platforms from YouTube to Twitch to Troll to Bookshop to Twitter to whatever. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next videos and streams. Bye.